Welcome to today's story. More than 2,000 years ago, a monumental event took place, an event that not only shook history but also changed the fate of humanity forever. It was the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But what really happened? How could an empty tomb transform the faith of billions over millennia? And what is the true significance of this event for each of us today? Join me as we travel back in time to the final days of Jesus on earth. We are in Jerusalem, where thousands have just witnessed an unjust trial. A man, innocent of any crime, has been sentenced to death. He was beaten, humiliated, and ultimately crucified on a cross between two thieves. That man was Jesus Christ, the one whom many believed to be the Son of God. That day was dark. The sky turned gloomy, the earth trembled, and the temple curtain was torn in two. Those who witnessed it were astonished. Some cried out, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." But it seemed like everything had ended. Jesus was dead. His disciples were confused, afraid, and in hiding. The hope they had placed in him appeared to vanish. The Jewish leaders believed they had put an end to his movement, and his enemies rejoiced in their victory. His body was laid in a rock-hewn tomb, sealed by a massive stone and guarded by soldiers. No one could enter or leave. Yet, just 3 days later, a miracle took place, an event that changed everything. The tomb was empty. Jesus had risen. This was not just a miracle, but the very foundation of the Christian faith, the source of hope and salvation. So what really happened? Let's journey through each moment of this extraordinary event to understand the greatest miracle in human history. 3 days in the tomb. After Jesus took his last breath on the cross, a man named Joseph of Arimathea, a devoted follower, requested permission from Pilate to take down his body and lay it to rest in a new tomb, carved into the rock. The tomb was located in a quiet garden, unused by anyone before. Once Jesus' body was placed inside, a large stone was rolled across the entrance, sealing it shut. As the sky darkened, the night cast its shadow over Jerusalem. The disciples were overcome with grief and despair. They had followed Jesus for 3 years, witnessing countless miracles and listening to his powerful teachings. They had believed he was the Messiah, the one who would rescue their people. But now he was dead. All hope seemed lost. Peter, the one who had once vowed never to forsake Jesus, now hung his head in shame, tormented by his regret for denying him 3 times. The women who had followed Jesus from the very beginning could hardly believe that the one they loved was now nothing more than a lifeless body lying in a tomb. They spent the Sabbath in silence, mourning and praying. Meanwhile, outside the tomb, the Jewish leaders were uneasy. They remembered something Jesus had said before he died. "After 3 days, I will rise again." Afraid that his disciples might steal the body and claim he had risen, they went to the Roman governor Pilate and requested a guard for the tomb. Pilate agreed. A squad of Roman soldiers was sent to seal the tomb and stand watch at its entrance. Through the darkness of the night, they gripped their weapons tightly, eyes scanning every movement, every shadow. No one knew what was about to happen. 3 days passed. Silent, still, nothing unusual. The disciples remained in hiding, filled with fear. The soldiers continued their watch, unwavering. But in the early hours of the 3rd day, just before dawn, a miracle took place. The resurrection, the empty tomb. The sky was still dim. The first rays of dawn had yet to illuminate Jerusalem. The guards stood motionless before the tomb, their eyes weary from a long night of watch. Suddenly, a blinding light burst forth from heaven. A radiant angel, shining like lightning, descended from the sky. His brilliance outshone the sun. The massive stone sealing the tomb, something no human could move, was suddenly rolled away. The earth trembled violently. The guards were stricken with overwhelming terror. They trembled and collapsed to the ground as though dead. The tomb was empty. Jesus was no longer there. That early morning, a group of women, including Mary Magdalene, hurried to the tomb, carrying spices to anoint Jesus' body. They wondered how they would roll away the heavy stone to enter. But when they arrived, they were stunned. The stone had already been rolled away. They stepped inside. No one was there. Only the burial cloths remained, neatly folded. Mary Magdalene was overcome with distress. Tears streamed down her face. "They have taken my Lord away. Where have they put him?" Suddenly, 2 angels appeared, dressed in dazzling white. One of them spoke. "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen, just as he said." The women trembled, both in fear and awe. At that moment, Mary turned around. Before her stood a man. She assumed he was the gardener. Weeping, she pleaded, "Sir, if you have taken him away, please tell me where, and I will go to retrieve him." The man gently spoke, "Mary." She froze. That voice, she recognized it instantly. It was Jesus. He was alive. Mary fell to her knees, tears of joy streaming down her face. Jesus looked at her and said, "Go and tell my disciples." Mary ran, her heart overflowing with a joy she had never known. The empty tomb was not just a sign. It was proof of Jesus' victory over death. From that moment, a new era began. Jesus had risen, and humanity would never be the same again. The appearances of the risen Jesus. Jesus had risen, but he did not stop at an empty tomb. He appeared, clearly, vividly, not just once but multiple times, to prove that his resurrection was real, not a myth. 1. Appearing to 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. On the afternoon of Resurrection Sunday, 2 disciples, Cleopas and his companion, were walking away from Jerusalem toward the village of Emmaus. They spoke of everything that had happened. Their hearts were heavy with grief and disappointment. The one they had believed in was now dead. Suddenly, a mysterious man joined them on their journey. He asked, "What are you discussing that makes you so sad?" They responded, "Are you the only one in Jerusalem who doesn't know what has happened? Jesus of Nazareth was killed. We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel, but now it is over." The man smiled and explained to them the prophecies in the scriptures, how the Messiah had to suffer before entering his glory. When they reached the village, they invited him to stay for dinner. As he broke the bread, their eyes were suddenly opened. It was Jesus! And just like that, he disappeared. Amazed, they turned to each other and exclaimed, "Didn't our hearts burn within us when he spoke to us on the road?" They hurried back to Jerusalem to share the joyous news with the other disciples. Shar 2. Appearing to the disciples without Thomas present. That evening, the disciples gathered in a locked room, afraid that the Jewish leaders might arrest them. Suddenly, Jesus appeared among them. He said, "Peace be with you." The disciples were astonished, terrified, thinking they were seeing a ghost. But Jesus held out his hands and feet, showing them the nail marks. "Look at me. Touch me, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as I do." They gazed at him, touched him, and knew it was truly Jesus alive. Their hearts filled with overwhelming joy. But one disciple was missing, Thomas. 3. Appearing to Thomas, from doubter to believer. When the disciples later told Thomas about Jesus' appearance, he refused to believe. "I will not believe. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and place my hand into his side, I will not believe." 8 days later, the disciples were gathered again in the locked room. Once more, Jesus appeared among them. He turned to Thomas and said, "Put your finger here. Look at my hands. Place your hand into my side. Do not doubt, believe." Tears filled Thomas's eyes as he fell to his knees. "My Lord and my God." Jesus smiled and said, "Thomas, you believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who have not seen, yet still believe." For the next 40 days, Jesus continued to appear to many, by the Sea of Galilee, on the mountains, and finally, before his ascension to heaven. The resurrection was not just a story. It was truth, evidence that Jesus had triumphed over death, and from that moment, the world would never be the same again. Conclusion: the resurrection, the event that changed humanity. If there were one event that could change all of humanity, what do you think it would be? A great invention? A revolution that altered history? No. More than 2,000 years ago, that event took place. A man, crucified on a cross, buried in a stone tomb, came back to life. The resurrection of Jesus Christ was not just a miracle. It was the turning point of history, the foundation of faith, and an unending source of hope. And from that moment, the world was never the same again. From Jerusalem, the news of Jesus' resurrection spread far and wide. Those who were once filled with fear and doubt were now filled with joy and power. The disciples, who had once hidden in fear, were now willing to face the world, to endure suffering, even to give their lives to proclaim the good news. Because they had seen the risen Jesus. They had touched him. They had eaten and spoken with him. They had heard him say, "I have overcome the world. Go and preach the gospel to all nations." And from that moment, Christianity spread to every corner of the world. But the story of the resurrection is not just a story of the past. It is our story today. Have you ever felt hopeless? Have you ever thought everything was over? Have you ever fallen in failure and wondered if you could ever rise again? Remember the empty tomb. Remember that darkness is not the end. Remember that Jesus Christ conquered death. He did not only rise 2,000 years ago, he is alive today in the hearts of billions around the world. And if you believe, he can renew your life, bringing light even into the darkest places. The resurrection of Christ is not just an event, it is an invitation to believe in miracles, an invitation to live with hope, an invitation to walk in love and faith. Today, if you feel the need for renewal in your heart, remember, the tomb is empty. Jesus has risen, and he is always with us. Peace be with you. Final call to action in the video. If this story has touched your heart, hit like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss future content. Comment below. What are your thoughts on the story of Jesus' resurrection? Thank you for listening. May you have a peaceful and blessed day.